Right now, President Trump is sitting down with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan for a bilateral meeting. He was welcomed to the presidential compound with a lavish ceremony. While President Trump has strengthened ties with Erdoğan during his 2 terms in office, Turkey is at times a controversial NATO member. Before their meeting, President Trump was asked if he would sell F-35 jets to Turkey. Take a listen to his response.
It's a decision we're going to make. We have a very good relationship. I would think that many people, I can tell you, many people, including the people sitting right here, thinks, why wouldn't we do that? We have a better relationship with Turkey, and Turkey's been in many ways much more loyal than other countries that we think would be loyal. So something certainly we would consider.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Ankara, Turkey. So, Ed, can you set the scene for us? What are both President Trump and President Erdogan hoping to get out of the meeting?
Well, first of all, if that just landed with you like a not-so-subtle jab, that's exactly how it was supposed to land. The president saying Turkey's been a better friend and ally to the United States and some other members of this alliance. And what that leads to is what we anticipate will be yet another round of criticism by the president of most members of the alliance for refusing to commit troops, to permit landing rights or even overflight rights for U.S. operations at the beginning of the war with Iran. He's likely to call out, for example, the British leader Keir Starmer, who in one way or another has essentially said to the president, we're happy to help you on the back end of this, but not on the front end. And that set off the president several weeks ago as he once again questioned why NATO existed, why it wasn't assisting the United States with the war with Iran, and why so many of its members seem reluctant to commit more forces, more money to defense. The summit after today is set to focus on those broader issues, but today is very much about signaling to the world how close the president considers his relationship with President Erdogan and doing his friend a favor by showing up at the palace for this elaborate bilateral and meeting that continues this afternoon without press access, and then a dinner later tonight, that this is being held at all here in the Turkish capital. Certainly not the largest, best known, most cosmopolitan Turkish city, but an important one to the history of the modern Turkish Republic and to President Erdogan is a coup in and of itself. That he gets to host the president for several hours at this lavish presidential palace that's also hosting the full summit is another mark for Erdogan, who has struggled to convince Europe over the years that his country should be a full-fledged economic and defense member. But they, of course, have issues regarding its relations with other parts of this part of the world, the Middle East, with the fact that it does do a fair amount of business with Russia, with its human rights record, and just the general theory that many in Europe have that Turkey isn't necessarily European enough. So all of that to be discussed, and certainly the president lending his time and presence to the Turkish leader is designed to burnish his credentials ahead of the meetings tomorrow.
On another subject, Ed, the president is set, as you know, to meet with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy tomorrow. We just in the last hour had a conversation with a member of the Ukraine's parliament, Helena Yashchenko, and we talked about the fact that the president has suggested in multiple interviews with the press that in his discussions with Vladimir Putin, Putin would like to end the war. And we know that the Kremlin has released a statement signaling something similar to that. But what I asked her was, it seems to me that Putin would like to end the war if he is allowed to keep the parts of Russia the parts of Ukraine that Russia controls or controls to some extent, including Crimea, which he seized during President Obama's term in 2014, the Donbas region, and Zaporizhia and Kherson. And for her and for President Zelenskyy, that those are non-starters. Has the president signaled that he would like Ukraine to allow Russians to keep part of the territory that they've seized over the course of the last 4 years?
He's telegraphed that several times over the last 4 years, yes. But what he has also signaled more recently is just the incredible loss of life and treasure that Russia's facing. And that's why he thinks Putin is bound and determined to find an end to this war. Consider some of the numbers we've heard just in the last several weeks regarding Russia's losses. They're now looking at about 30,000 casualties per month which by some estimates by experts who are tracking the war is more than the roughly 27,000 recruits they can bring in each month. Now, casualties, remember, in the military sense can be deaths and injuries or missing soldiers, but 30,000 lost, 27,000 gained just shows you they're going to start to have a personnel problem in the ranks of the Russian military if this keeps up. And those same estimates now suggest 1.4 million Russian battlefield casualties since the start of the war in 2022. Again, deaths, injuries, and missing soldiers, which just blows away casualty numbers for the United States, for example, in every conflict we've had since World War II. So those numbers are why the president continues to think Putin may eventually come around to a peace deal. But I would stress what I told you in the last hour. What the president said today about his hopefulness for a deal is almost carbon copy what he was saying a year ago at the NATO summit at The Hague, when we all knew when this conflict began it would be several years before it was resolved.
All right, Ed O'Keefe for us. Ed, thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it. For more on the summit, CBS News contributor Elliot Ackerman joins us in studio. He's a former CIA officer and Marine Corps veteran. So, Elliot, you heard Ed's sort of response to my question that we posed to the Ukrainian parliamentarian. What are your thoughts?
I think Ed's points are great, and there's this sort of idea of how much punishment can the Russians take. But again, if we look through history, so much of the Russian identity, if you go all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars or the Second World War, is that they can withstand this type of punishment. And when it comes to a war of attrition, any power would be, forewarned to try to defeat the Russians in a war of attrition.
Let's think about the Ukraine side of this, though, for a second. I mean, we saw Russia attack Kyiv, large-scale attack on the eve of the summit, where, of course, the Ukraine-Russia war is going to be one of the main topics. What are their most pressing needs right now? Because, as Vlad said, when we talked to Helena Yashchenko, she said it's anti-ballistic missile capabilities. That's what they're seeking. But what's your assessment?
I think it's the technology, it's, anti-ballistic missile capabilities, it's, just the enduring support of the European allies throughout this war, because, as much manpower as the Russians can throw at the Ukrainians, that equation can be shifted to give the Ukrainians an advantage if they have a technological edge. And so they need to keep having that technological support and financial support from NATO and from their partners.
Just one more, I know we have to go, but do you think NATO has any real bite anymore? Because, I mean, that's also at the heart of this.
Good question.
That, the president is asking NATO allies to contribute more to defense spending, that the U.S. has been carrying it. And we have seen some NATO members beef that up, of course, Germany being one. But when it comes to trying to broker some kind of peace, is NATO really going to be able to do anything?
I think in NATO's current incarnation, obviously they need the United States, but I think there's going to be NATO as it existed before the war in Ukraine and NATO as it will exist after the war in Ukraine. I think there will be a NATO that's transformed and one by which probably many of the European nations in NATO will have to reinvest, and we're seeing that already reinvesting in their defense capabilities. And I think the post-Ukraine war NATO is going to be a different alliance.
Very interesting. Elliot, always great to have you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks.